In about 360 BC, Plato wrote the Timaeus and Critias dialogues. The following explanation of Plato's descriptions of the Atlantic island is based solely on Plato's writings. Plato wrote the Timaeus and Critias dialogues for his students and colleagues at his academy in Athens and throughout the Greek world. Plato knew he was writing about something that was not common knowledge for the Greeks of his time. The Atlantis story was not in any myths or legends of the Greeks. Plato knew that the Atlantis story would be analysed and criticised while he was still alive and head of the academy. Why would he try to deceive educated people by claiming the Atlantis story was true if it was false? Although modern academics insist Plato fabricated the entire Atlantis story, they do not have any evidence to prove that. They claim because Plato occasionally used myths in his other dialogues, the Atlantis story is just another of Plato's myths. They completely ignore that Plato states several times it is not a myth, it is a true story. Plato states the Egyptians gave Solon the Atlantis story, and Plato had access to a copy of that story. So if Plato made none of it up, all of the dozens of details about Atlantis and prehistoric Athens are actual history. What would academics say if they had to prove Plato made up the entire Atlantis story? Because Plato's Atlantis story starts with Solon's visit to Egypt, they would have to argue that Plato fabricated Solon's visit to Egypt and the Temple of Neith. But it is known that Solon visited the Temple of Neith and spoke there with senior temple priests. The academics would then have to argue that even if Solon went to the Temple of Neith, he did not translate the Atlantis story and take the document back to Athens. According to Plato, Solon did bring a document of the Atlantis story back to Athens, and Plato likely had access to it. Why would Plato lie about that? Another argument used by academics is that the Egyptian priests tried to fool Solon by telling him a completely false story about Atlantis. Solon was an intelligent man of high status. He had a private meeting with their pharaoh, so why would the priests lie to Solon? At the very least, any site for what Plato called the Atlantic island should have three distinct features. Plato states the Atlantic island was located somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean beyond the Pillars of Heraclius. In antiquity, the Pillars of Heraclius or Straits of Heraclius is the Strait of Gibraltar at the entrance to the Mediterranean. Also, the Atlantic island was larger than Libya and Asia put together. The other essential part of the Atlantis story is that the Atlantic island, or most of it, sank below the sea and must now be underwater. Plato repeatedly locates the Atlantic island in the Atlantic Ocean. He clearly states the difference between the Mediterranean Sea, the Atlantic Ocean, and the lands on either side of the Atlantic. For this sea, which is within the Straits of Heraclius, is only a harbour, having a narrow entrance, but that other is a real sea, and the surrounding land might be most truly called a boundless continent. Plato states there was an island situated in front of the straits, which are by you called the Pillars of Heraclius, and was the way to other islands, and from these you might pass to the whole of the opposite continent which surrounded the true ocean. Remarkably, the Greeks of Solon and Plato's time had no idea about any lands or opposite continent beyond the Atlantic Ocean. When Plato describes an opposite continent on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, he quotes some more ancient lost knowledge of the Americas. An Atlantic island in front of the straits is often claimed to be close to the Strait of Gibraltar. A more likely explanation is for the island to be opposite the Strait of Gibraltar, meaning not too far north or south of the strait. That description excludes locations off the coast of West or Southern Africa, or offshore from Western Europe, Britain and Scandinavia. Plato's description of the size of the Atlantic island from the Timaeus, the island was larger than Libya and Asia put together, and from the Critias was an island greater in extent than Libya and Asia. The modern understanding of what is now called Libya and Asia is different to when Solon was in Egypt around 570 BC. When Solon visited Egypt, the Egyptians would likely have defined Libya as the lands occupied for thousands of years by the Libyan tribes to their immediate west. It is an area of roughly 700 kilometres east-west by 400 kilometres north-south, which gives a total area of 280,000 square kilometres. The Egyptians would have known Asia as the land the Greeks later called Anatolia or Asia Minor. It was the westernmost bulge of the continent of Asia. The dimensions of Asia Minor are roughly 900 kilometres east-west by 650 kilometres north-south, which gives a total area of 585,000 square kilometres. If you add the above estimates for Libya and Asia, it gives a combined area of 865,000 square kilometres. Plato wrote that the Atlantic island was larger than Libya and Asia put together, so it may have been an island of about 1 million square kilometres. If the Atlantic island still existed, it would now be the second largest island on Earth. It would be somewhere in size between the islands of Greenland and New Guinea. Plato uses two standard distance measures in the Timaeus and Critias dialogues, the foot and the stadion. There were several different ancient standards for the foot. The Royal Egyptian foot is used for Plato's distance descriptions. It is assumed the Egyptian priests used this measure when they talked with Solon. For distances in stadia, one stadion was 600 feet, regardless of the size of the foot used. The Royal Egyptian foot was 350 millimetres, so one Royal Egyptian stadion is 209 metres. The other standard foot measures would give a shorter stadion measure, but they are all around 200 metres. Some academics have suggested that the Egyptians, Solon or Plato confused solar years with lunar months. They claim that the 9,000-year time frame for the Atlantis story is 9,000 months, or only 750 years. It is doubtful that the ancient Egyptians would confuse months and years. The Egyptians had used two slightly different calendars for thousands of years before Solon visited Egypt. They had a solar year of approximately 365 days, representing the Earth's complete orbit around the Sun. The ancient Greeks had a year divided into 12 lunar months, which also represented the Earth's complete orbit around the Sun. As well as being a philosopher, Plato was a mathematician. He was not ignorant of distance and time measures. Therefore, any academic arguments against Plato's measurements are false.
This ends the second video. It again confirms that Plato believed the details of the Atlantis story. It also gives Plato's directions for the size and general location of the Atlantic island outside the Mediterranean. The next video gives an exact location for the Atlantic island and describes its form.